am Orlando Jones, and I just want you to know that the Moana Nui podcast will be starting soon. Stay tuned, yo.
I'm Veronica Taylor, and from myself and Ash Ketchum, I just want to say, Moana Nui, I choose you!
Aloha, everybody. Aloha mai kako, and mahalo for joining us today on the Moana Nui podcast. We appreciate you as viewers of the live podcast, as well as those who catch later recordings, and of course, Papa Ola Lōkahi, in whom we share partnership with for content connecting Hawaii to the diaspora. Today's show, we are in for a treat as we get to talk story with two mana wahine who were students of Dr. Trask. The late Haunani-Kay Trask, for those who may not know who she is, was a fierce advocate for the self-determination of Kanaka Maoli. She was a poet and educator, was part of the working group for the crafting of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, a film director, and held many hats in the active resistance against colonial constructs. Upon her departure to the realm of the ancestors, she is remembered by those who love her and by those who hold on to her words, her ideas, and her legacy. Talking story with us today is Dr. Noelani Goodyear Kaupua and Dr. Aaron Kahunawai Ka'ala Wright. We are very excited to have these two join us today. Raised on the lands of Oahu, Noelani Goodyear Kaupua is a Kanaka Maoli who works as a professor of Hawaiian and Indigenous politics at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. She believes in the power of Ea, the living, breathing, rising of her sovereign people, because she hears and feels it in their stories, or our stories. Noi was raised by the Ko'olau Mountains and Kaneohe Bay and strengthened by the currents of Ka'iwi. Her popo taught her how to play horseshoes, to share mangoes from her tree with anyone who asks, and to treat youth with genuine respect and adoration. Noi tries to bring this kind of love to her writing, teaching, and leadership roles. Her commitment to Native Hawaiian education is evidenced in her dedication to public education and in her work as a board member of the Kamehameha Schools, Kane Hunamoku Voyaging Academy, and Ma'o Organic Farms. An author and editor, Noelani's books and articles address Hawaiian movements and Indigenous education. More information about her publications can be found at www.noigoodyearkaupua.info. If you followed the events on Mauna Kea in 2019, Noi was one of 8 who protested on the Mauna Kea access road by tying themselves to a cattle grate. I say this to not only say Noi teaches Hawaiian politics, self-determination, and decolonialism, but that her words matches her actions. Mahalo Noi for joining us today.
Aloha, mahalo nui for having us, Pauahi.
Yes, of course. Aaron Kahunawai Ka'ala Wright is Kanaka Oiwi Hawaii, or Native Hawaiian, and a 5th generation Kama'aina of Kalua o Palena Kalihi Oahu. Raised on the lands of her mother's family and doing her best to raise the 6th generation on their Kula'iwi. For nearly 20 years, Kahunawai was a student affairs scholar practitioner supporting Kanaka and other indigenous folks to and through higher education before transitioning her current role as an associate professor of educational administration in the College of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. The research she pursues connects her commitment to Ea, Hawaii, with the transformative potential of higher education for fellow Kanaka and Pacifica folks toward Kuleana Lahui, or Native Nation building. Some of Kahunawai's work includes Ka Ikena a Ka Hawaii towards a Kanaka Oiwi critical race theory. Welcome, Kahunawai, and mahalo for joining us as well.
Mahalo, Pauahi.
Together, both Noi and Kahunawai continue to collaborate on bringing content with works such as a special edition of Hu Lili, a multidisciplinary research on Native Hawaiian well-being, and a biography of Haunani-Kay Trask. Again, we express our gratitude for your presence today and virtually as we engage with the legacy of Dr. Haunani-Kay Trask. So let's get into the discussion for today. Before we move on, I just want to ask, is there anything that either of you want to add to your intros that maybe I didn't have a chance to say that you may want to highlight? No? Okay.
No, thank you so much.
All right. So let's revisit the life of Dr. Haunani-Kay Trask. So to start, this is either for either of you or both of you can answer. Any questions that we ask, both of you can answer. It doesn't really matter. I sent the questions, so you should both be able to speak to any of these. We may not go in the order that the questions are presented to you. So just a heads up. But to start, what are 3 words that you would associate with Dr. Trask and no explanation? 3 words for the audience to kind of just hold on to.
I'll go first. I was thinking fierce, brilliant, and generous.
In addition, because I agree 100% with Noi's 3 words, I would say ku'e, kuleana, visionary.
Amazing. Okay. So audience, hold on to those words. There are a good amount of Kanaka outside of Hawaii who love Haunani-Kay Trask. But what can be said about her to those who are not aware of her? And this question kind of comes as a personal question, because I did not know who Trask was until I was well in my 20s, right? So because I lived in the diaspora, I think it was like one of my professors who was like, oh, have you ever read Haunani-Kay Trask? And I was like, oh, no, I never heard of her, you know? So then I read some of her works and continue to read her works to this day. So what would you want people to know about her who may not know her?
Kono, you want to go first?
No, but I will. You take turns. Sorry, the both of us, we're always like trying to give each other the first anyway.
Yeah.
The first chance. I guess for me, I would say for folks who don't really know much about her, her public persona, I think is contrasted with like more of her personal persona. I think because Noi and I knew her just as a, you know, she's our kumu definitely, but just also as a person, she is one of the, and maybe this comes through on some of her public speeches, but she's one of the funniest people you're ever going to meet. Her wit is so incredibly quick. And I think you can see that a little when she's sort of bantering back and forth with certain interviewers. But she's so funny and she's so kind, like Noi was saying, and generous with her time and her words and her encouragement. And I think that for me personally, that's an important part of her ano that I would love for people to know, in addition to all of the things that people see publicly, you know, her fierceness, her dynamic sort of oratory, all of those other more robust, colorful attributes that people often associate with her.
Yeah, so just to add, I guess, you know, I think about the first time I became aware of who she was. Kahuna and I were her students in Hawaiian studies in the early to mid 90s. But she was, at least in Hawaii, a very prominent figure in the Hawaiian movement from the 80s onward. And I think the media really loved featuring her because she was so dramatic. Part of her training as a dramatist when she was, an actor when she was younger. But she also comes from this family of amazing political orators. And so she was just the most amazing speaker. And she was really featured also in the media because she spoke so fearlessly about the harms that tourism and military and just like ignorant settlers in Hawaii were doing to Kanaka. And because she spoke so fearlessly, people either loved her or they detested her. And that's what happens when you speak. We just were at this event that was hosted by the Pa'i Foundation and Ka Lahui Hawai'i that was honoring her, and just this past Saturday. And one of the things that Kumu Kawai Kapu Hewitt was talking about was how Wahamama Oya Ka'ipuka, she opened the door. She opened the door for people for Kanaka to question that we are not American, as she said in 1993. And then also because she spoke so powerfully about the truth, that means sometimes you're not as popular, right? And so anyway, but she was so popular in so many ways. Yeah, she's a poet, a teacher, a fierce leader, just so many things, so many things.
I love to show when I'm guest lecturing for the students that I lecture for, I love to show the clippings of her. And this two Thursdays ago, I shared with my social justice class that I TA for that exact piece where she says we are not American. And so I'm reading all of their assignments now, and some of them are like really, really hung on to that. And so, yeah, I think she is for every generation. And sometimes, like you said, speaking truth to power, or truth against power is what I think she often did. Isn't always popular, but I think we're at a time where some of these things are popular for those who want to listen, right? So kind of referencing that, her speech on January 17th, 1993, that you just alluded to, Noi, that so powerfully objected to American identity for Kanaka Maoli, is one that we see in rotation on social media. Did her idea ever waver from this notion? And if so, how? And if not, why do you think this is?
Never wavered. I think for context, it's helpful to understand that she is within her own family and within the Lahui Hawai'i, she's of the second generation to live their whole life under U.S. occupation. So her parents were the very first generation to live their entire lives under U.S. occupation. Her grandmother remembered when Lili'u was overthrown and passed that story down to her mom, and her mom passed that story down onto her. So it's not that far away, I think when we were younger as her students, we would think like, 100 years ago, that seems so long, 1893, that's like ages ago. But now that we're like a half a century old ourselves, we realize, that wow, that it really wasn't that long. So her kupuna were signed the Ku'e petitions. They were very aware that within that their family, they carried those stories. And so her and her siblings, they were all taught from growing up, that Hawaiians had our own country and we're very capable of governing ourselves and running a sustainable society in our islands, providing for all the needs of all the people without any foreign ships, without any help from anybody else for the vast majority of our existence. And so she carried that very deeply. She never ever wavered from that mana'o.
Kahuna Vine, did you want to add?
No.
Okay. How about, what are some of her foundational works that you would recommend? Oh, actually, let's go back. let's kind of go back before we go to this. If for the people who do know who she is, if they've read her works, they may know this, that she actually went to college on the continent. So in some of her work, she speaks about her experiences in the diaspora. Can you speak to how the diaspora shaped her ideas and thoughts?
Yeah. Kahuna, you want to take that first, or you want?
No, that was your part. So
Okay. Sorry. Well, Poi, you can just tell us too if you're like you speak first, and then you like.
Okay.
You want to avoid the
awkward silence.
The polite. Oh, you go first. Oh, you go first.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Haunani-Kay was she graduated in 1967. So if you can imagine that time, this is like the Vietnam War era. You know, some of her classmates are being drafted and sent off to war. She herself started off at Drake University, didn't like it there, went to Chicago, experienced tremendous racism there, and then transferred to the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where she ended up getting all of her degrees. Not to say that she didn't, she definitely experienced racism in Madison as well, but what she arrived at when she got to Madison was almost upon arrival, what was happening there was massive student uprising, and in particular, a Black student-led strike. There had been on another campus in the University of Wisconsin system an incident where every single Black student was expelled for protesting the war and standing up for calling for Black studies. And so she arrived at this like amazing moment of student organizing. There was the Black student-led strike. There was a TA strike, so graduate student teaching assistants organizing to have their labor recognized and their right to collectively bargain. And then she became really involved, as well as supporting those movements and involved in anti-war protests. She became really involved in the radical feminist movement and was very pivotal in the efforts to create women's studies and feminist studies courses in the university's curriculum, particularly in her department, political science, but she worked with people across all departments. It was 10 years roughly that she was in Madison. So, you know, that was a significant and formative part of her life while she was away. Her sister, also Mililani Trask, you know, of Ka Lahui Hawai'i fame, was also away, but on the West Coast. And their exposure to these anti-imperialist, anti-racist movements were really formative in shaping them. And also for them seeing how, and for Haunani-Kay in particular, seeing how universities could be more than bastions of white supremacy and settler colonial power. Like, how could we capture some of that space and energy for a much broader swath of people?
Kahuna Vai, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Noi captured it perfectly. I think the only thing maybe that I wanted to emphasize is that her time at Madison really brought to the fore the use of the Black Power movement as just really inspirational and formational to her later political analysis. And so as students, we used to get those kinds of readings in her classes as well. So that, to me, that's an important thread through her work that lasted, I think, throughout her lifetime. I feel like that's an important part too.
Yeah, and I really can relate to these sentiments. And I think for many Kanaka in the diaspora, especially in the 80s, right? Like we were out here, but we weren't out here at the rates that we are now. My father joined the military at some point in the 80s. And I remember leaving, and pretty much my whole life grew up around the Black community or the African-American community, right? And so this was the community that like really took me in. And so there's similarities between, you know, Hawaiian's systems of families and like how Black families like relate to their children as well too. So yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. I'm not going to say this is for all Kanaka in the diaspora, but I know that there are many in the diaspora who hang on to these other methods of what family looks like, right? And embraces those families, but also the movements, right? So like, for example, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, right? In 2020 at the height of Breonna Taylor. So kind of understanding all of the stuff I had learned in my Pan-African Studies class or my African-American Studies classes through my undergrad programs, and, you know, really holding on to that identity. But knowing that at some point in my 20s, I was like, okay, wait, why do I know so much Black history, but then I don't even know my own history? Right. And so it was that importance of like knowing about the civil rights movements and knowing about the Black Panthers and so many other movements that were going on that were carrying with the Black Panthers, and being like, okay, wait, we were there too. Right. So yeah, it's very interesting to hear that she was kind of connected in the same way to these kind of movements when she was in the diaspora. So this leads me to the question that I was going to ask next. And we'll ask Hunavai to go first. So some of her works, she speaks about her experiences in the diaspora. Can you speak to how the diaspora shaped her ideas and thoughts?
I think Noi and I both spoke a bit to this. I think being away for her, and she would tell us this as students too, where when you're away from, she would call Hawaii the colony, right? When you're away from the colony, the politics of colonization become a lot more, I think, in relief, right? You can see them more, they're highlighted more, as opposed to when you're living in the colony. It looks very different sort of when you're living through sort of the day-to-day of colonialism and occupation. So I feel like her being away provided her with a bit of distance so that she could look at Hawaii as sort of this unit of analysis. And then with the influence of, you know, the Black Power movement, with the American Indian movement, all of those different other movements that she was involved with, I think really informed the way that she started to see Hawaii. And you can see that in her early, you know, from the time she was started writing and publishing, you can see all of those influences in her work. I think one of the other important things that being away, I think helped to do in addition was, now I'm getting, sorry, my kid is texting me on the side, so I apologize for that. So I'm looking at that and looking at you folks. I'm gonna put him on mute, hold on. And I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. I don't know, Noi, did you wanna say anything else about how her being away influenced her?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think, you know, where she was in Madison was there were these movements, but predominantly it was white. It was like 95% white, the student body at that time. So she went from being at a school, Kamehameha, which was all Hawaiian, to being in a school where it was all white. And not all white, but, you know, again, 95%. She was treated as an exotic. I mean, she's beautiful. You know, if you've seen photos of her, that photo is from 1993. So when she's arrives in Madison in the 70s, I mean, she's just gorgeous. We looked at photos of her and some of her friends, and it'd be like, you know, all these people, and then her, bam, like she's just glowing. So she stood out, and when we went to go do interviews of folks there, the word that came up over and over again from her, and these are folks who are either her teachers or friends, was they called her exotic. And so I think on one hand, that really alerted her to the way that many people in the US see Hawaii and Hawaiians. So that was always an important part of her critique through her later work. Yeah, the way that Hawaii gets feminized and is exoticized. But I think the other thing that we heard from folks when we interviewed them about her life there was that she was never like a shrinking violet. She was never one who was shamed to speak up. And I think that actually comes from her family and her training before she got there. But she was ready to go toe to toe with professors, white male professors in her classes as a grad student. She was organizing alongside grad students and faculty when she was an upper division undergrad and later. And I think one of the things that this strengthened for her was that when she did come home and she was negotiating with, on behalf of the PKO with the US Navy officials, high-ranking officials, and, doing like politics from the grassroots, but speaking to state folks. Like she just never was scared, and I think part of that was probably always in her personality, but I think being away and having to really fight for the space to speak and fight against being just like marginalized and pigeonholed as this like beautiful exotic brown woman, it sharpened her blade even more.
Yeah, that was something when you were talking about that, I forgot about how everyone we interviewed, that was the first thing they would say was like, she was stunning, she was exotic. And then they would be, and then we would be wowed by how smart she was. And I know that kind of threw me off a little bit. And I can imagine, again, like Nori was saying, right, in a sea of whiteness, there's this beautiful woman who also has this immense brilliance coming to the fore, and you're just like blown away. Even her doctoral advisor, her dissertation advisor said the same thing. Is like she stood out in class because she was so beautiful and brilliant, and brilliant. Goodness.
Yeah, that's amazing. That idea of exotic now, I don't think holds a crab in a barrel, basically, meaning like it's such a not good word and can also be seen as like, racist to be exotic, right? Again, like some of these sentiments from research that I've done as well as my experiences, the same thing, right? Being called exotic, and what that kind of does to Kanaka and the diaspora, who hear these kind of subjectifications of like what people think about us, right? So
yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna add too, I think that also definitely impacted her relationship with feminism. You can see that that changing from the time she was at Madison to the time she came home, where her views on feminism just really shifted given her, I think, positionality. And I think I don't remember who said it. Maybe Noi said it on the Saturday event. Noi had referenced where folks were saying, she was talking about intersectionalism before a lot of folks were talking about it. Intersectionality, I should say, intersectionality. So I think that's one of the things being away did for her as well, is to show that even more.
Yeah, and so kind of thinking about so that for those of you who may not know what the Saturday event was, there was an event that was in honor of Haunani-Kay Trask, and there was some poetry readings that had happened there, and correct me if I'm wrong, just some words of affirmations and explanations of who she was. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this, yeah, go ahead, Noi. You can speak to that.
I was going to say, and many of us were her former students, revoicing or giving voice to her poetry.
So that's kind of what happened this past Saturday, is what they're referencing when you hear them say the event on Saturday. And then I know Kahuna Vai just brought up intersectionality, which is an amazing term for those of you who are not really, who may not know where that term comes from. It comes from Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black lawyer and activist. And it actually stems from a case with the General Motors company. And so there's some history there that is interesting to learn about. So if you don't know anything about Kimberly Crenshaw or the connections to how this term intersectionality came through, that is another person to really look to. So I want to talk about feminism because this is something that I'm really interested in myself. Dr. Trask wrote Eros and Power, The Promise of Feminist Theory, and then would later go on to write about how she does not subscribe to this idea fully anymore. And so Kahuna Vai kind of just alluded to this. What was her relationship with feminism and the ways this framework changed for her throughout her career and throughout her life? Kahuna Vai, do you want to start? And then we'll go with Noi.
I would say, I don't know if I can elaborate more on that other than to say that I feel because when she was away and she was exposed to all these different scholars, and not that she didn't have a sense of what being a Wahine meant, and a Hawaiian Wahine, I think it just became, again, like when I was saying, more sharpened through her experiences and through her exposure to the civil rights movement, to the feminist movement, and to being surrounded by white feminists at Madison, frankly. She fought very hard to establish women's studies there. She supported a faculty member who was a feminist who didn't get tenure and promotion. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, again, her lived experience was influenced by that. I'm gonna do the yikes thing and toss it to Noi because she was tasked with reading and analyzing Eros and Power for her part of the biography.
Like Kahuna Vai said, she was really influenced in those years of grad school by radical feminists who were talking about how different aspects of one's identity, came together: class, race, gender. But as I mentioned before, like a lot of the folks who were part of that feminist organizing in Madison were white feminists. Not to say that there weren't women of color feminists, but the people were predominantly organizing with the particular group that was trying to move women's studies forward were predominantly white. So she experienced some, rub and tension already there. And with her book, I think, one of the things that she criticizes is a lot of the kind of criticism that was coming out with the early feminist theory was like how the gender divisions of labor, like women are supposed to do this in the home and men are supposed to be out in the public world, I think it gave her language to talk about patriarchy in ways that she always knew and saw in her own family, in her own Hawaii, in her own life. But, as theory does, it gives us new language to talk about those things. So, she just experienced that in such an embodied way there. And then also when she got home, right, she was involved with Hawaiian movement organizing in Hawaii around Ka Ho'olawe. And so one of the first pieces that she publishes after coming home is this article on that she calls, the double colonization of Hawaiian women. And she talks about her view as a Native Hawaiian feminist, where she's also critiquing how patriarchy operates within our own movements and how that was limiting for women, who were not kind of fitting neatly into the acceptable categories for women, and even in leadership. So it was a struggle and a fight to get her and other women into leadership positions, which, she and others did. But then she also began organizing with feminists on the UH campus too. Again, at that time, campus feminists, mostly white. And there was this sense that you had to choose. You have to choose between your people and what we stand for, kind of a thing. And so, she always chose her people first, which isn't to say, though, that she ever gave up an analysis of gender, or how colonialism's occupation, militarization, all those things operate through gender hierarchies and gender violence. She was always very, very attuned to that. But, she was very much a pragmatic person as far as like her organizing. She wanted to not ever be stuck in, okay, I'm going to use the language that's like of cachet in academy at a particular moment. She wanted to make sure that what she was doing was legible, understandable to, and effective with her people. And I think at some point she found that the label feminist was not something that was going to be, I don't know, effective, I guess, in terms of organizing with Kanaka. But like I said, she never gave up that kind of analysis. And there were lots of other women of color at that time period when she makes that choice not to identify as a feminist, who also had a very contentious relationship with that term feminism. Doesn't mean that they didn't agree with critiques of patriarchy or with the absolute necessity of empowering women and disrupting a gender binary and all those things. But, it was a different kind of time than it is now, where like indigenous feminisms is a much more widespread kind of, there's more of a community there. I think at that time she didn't really have a community of Hawaiian feminists to be able to identify in that way.
Yeah. I kind of agree with what you're saying about indigenous feminisms. My first year, I took an indigenous feminism course with one of my supervisors right now, and she says to me, "I should have threw some Trask in there." And I was like, "Oh yeah."
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, since you're talking about some of her writings, what would be some of her foundational works that you would recommend for those who are just now being introduced to her? Why do you think these works are important for Kanaka, and maybe even Kanaka for just to review over again, right? Maybe they haven't read the work in like 15 years, and maybe it's just important at this time to read it again. Why are these works important for Kanaka and who have never lived on the Aina to read it? We'll start with Noi and then Kahunawai.
Yeah, one of the things that Kahunawai and I found was, even though we were her students and we thought we knew a lot of her work, is that as we really dug into this project, we're like, wow, she's just more and more. We found more and more and more things that we hadn't even been aware of, prior to starting the biography project. So I think first and foremost, From a Native Daughter, that's the collection of essays that came out in 1993, first edition, and then revised edition in 99. But still, if you read it today, like, it is so relevant for this political moment. It also shows how she was not just a Hawaiian nationalist who centered Hawaii. She always saw Hawaii in the context of a larger, as Heoli Osorio would say, upena, of anti-imperialist struggle. So that book actually starts off after the introduction with Pacific Islands, like our place in the Pacific. And she was very clear about situating us within our context of Moana Nui, not just thinking of Hawaii in relation to the US, but in that larger family, who are connected culturally and also connected through our political struggles against, foreign, particularly European and American powers that, sought to take our lands and subdue us. So that book, I think, is super important, and it's also really accessible. Her voice comes through so strongly in that book. I think the double colonization article that I mentioned is really important because even though she did, give up the label of feminist, I think many of the critiques that she makes in there are useful for us for the kind of like self-reflection about our own movements that are important. And I know when I teach it till today, the young Wahine in my classes always really, really love and appreciate that article because it helps give them language, as I was talking about earlier, for things that they're experiencing already all the time. And then her poetry, is if you enjoy poetry, she has 2 books of poetry that just give you a different sense of other sides of her, both that like really fierce political side and also all the love that is the foundation of why she's as fierce as she is. I'm going to pass it on and plug in.
I think that's everything that I would recommend definitely for the starter. I think as the part of the team that likes to read reports, I would say if folks are up for it, I would have them read the Native Hawaiian Study Commission final report that she wrote, because I think it gives folks just another perspective of her work, where, as Noi says, she calls it pragmatic and she wants her work to be legible. Those are great descriptors of how I think she moved. She wasn't just a person who could create and talk about theory. She was someone who put that theory into action. And her report writing, as boring as some people might see it, really can show how you take what you're thinking about and put it into actual action to make material changes in the lives of Kanaka people. So the Native Hawaiian Study Commission report, I would also say the Ka'u report of 1986, which she wrote as she contributed to writing it, and she was part of the task force, and it was the blueprint for Hawaiian everything throughout the University of Hawaii system, which is where the majority of Hawaiians participate in higher ed. Those works, I feel, are, again, provides insight into the ways in which she made the practice part of theory happen. And for me, as a person who does education, that's like super important. Is the theory gives us language. The theory helps us to make connections. The theory helps us to make sense of our world. But for me, without sort of how do we implement that, right? Where does the praxis piece come in? I think is where, there it is. I think that's where it's also very important, right? That's what, to me, makes her an outstanding scholar and leader, is because she didn't just, it's like Noi, she did like how you introduced her. She doesn't just talk about things. She actually helped to make change. And I feel like that part of her life doesn't get the kind of accolades that her scholarly work does. And the impact that she's had on Hawaiians, just again, everyday Hawaiians who just called her on the phone because she would have her home number published in the phone book, who would just call her and she would talk story with them. to students like us who would be in her classes, who she would take time to talk story with. I think those are all of the things that make her an amazing Hawaiian leader. Yeah, not just her brilliant written work, which has remained consistent for like 30 something years. And again, like what Nora was saying, right, is relevant after all this time. Like, I think that was one of the, I don't know why it was so surprising, but Noi and I, we would reread all of her work and just text each other or call each other and be like, how is this still relevant? You know, or like, I missed this thing that she wrote. And it just describes to a T what is happening with our people right now. And she wrote this in, you know, before the 90s, even in her work from the 1980s. And I think one other body of, it's not really her, well, it is her writing and it isn't her writing, but it's the transcriptions of her speeches. So she has, like, for example, I was reading on a trip recently, her Ho'oku'oko'a speech from like 1985. And just reading that was so many gems, you know, and Namako Ka'aina, and we want to give them props because they've helped us so much. Joan Manders helped us so much with getting these transcripts, allowing us to watch her videos. But you can order the transcripts from them and you can read all of the speeches that they have on file. So 93 from Ho'oku'oko'a, like all of those different speeches that she has, I think is another really great way to get to know Haunani-Kay in a different way.
Yeah, just to add one more thing to that, you know, if you're more of a visual, like to watch videos and less reading, the UH system, both through the UH Hamilton Library, it's like if you Google UH Voyager, it has a number of the First Friday episodes. So the other thing, this is of course before the internet, right? Before we all had smartphones. She led for many years, they called it First Friday, the unauthorized news. It was like a regular show where they would do news and analysis that wasn't covered by the mainstream media. So she was really interested in making sure that the kinds of things that she was studying and thinking about were accessible to anybody for free, you know, not just people who were enrolled in the university. So all those First Friday episodes can be viewed either through the UH Manoa or through West Oahu has this film archive called Ulu Ulu, the Ulu Ulu Film Archive. Yeah, that's that one. And you can also request episodes there. So oftentimes they would be her and her sister Mililani, who's in this photo, or it would be her and John Whittick, who was a labor organizer, or her and her partner, David Stannard. And from those, you get a sense of just the breadth of her knowledge, you know. So there would be episodes where she's talking about a very specific kind of like thing that the city and county, the city council was doing that was going to impact lands or community folks in Hawaii. Or at this, and in the same episode, she would be talking about an issue like Palestine, or, you know, something going on in some seemingly far place in the world that she understood and helped people to see was all connected in some way.
Amazing. Mahalo for that. So I'm going to ask a couple of personal questions to you all in your relationship with Dr. Trask. Thinking about everything that you all had just spoke about in her readings, I think it's important to just kind of reiterate what you all were saying. Dr. Trask has written about tourism, about militarization, about the academy, right? As Noi said, you can find all this stuff in From a Native Daughter. So if you're not familiar with that work, that is a pivotal point you can start with. And if you are familiar with that, then like Kahuna said, there's other readings that perhaps we weren't aware of. I did not know anything about that. Ka'u of 1986. I'm excited to read that. But yeah, mahalo for, sharing those works with us. So first I'm going to give you Before I ask you, how has Dr. Trask impacted both of you? Do you remember the first time you met Dr. Trask, and what were your thoughts and feelings? And we'll start with Kahuna Vai.
So by the time I got to the university in the fall of 1991, she had been very prominent in the news media. So I grew up knowing who she was, and so I had like that kind of an impression of her, like, wow, she's just like so fierce. Honestly, it made me super uncomfortable because I had not been faced with a Hawaiian anybody, Hawaiian anybody, not just a woman, just a Hawaiian being so forceful um, and so just brilliant like that. I mean, it was a little intimidating, but the first time I met her in person was at Campus Center, and I think it was 1992. She and Kumulili Kanaka Maoli had done a small forum on building the Hawaiian Studies building. Because it was a controversy. The University of Hawaii was thinking of not building it anymore, right? So they were fighting very hard to keep the momentum going towards the building, to getting it built. And I sat, like, literally I had bought lunch and I saw them speaking. I was like, oh, let me listen to what's going on. And so I just like sat on the stairs at Campus Center and listened to what they were talking about, ate my lunch, and then after they were so compelling, especially Kumu Haunani-Kay. And I just went down like a dum-dum head and I was like, hey, I would like to get involved because I love Hawaiian things and I'm a Hawaiian person. So what can I do to help? And they were so kind and gracious. And from what you see in the media, people would, they'd be, like I said, I was intimidated, but after seeing them speak, I was like, they're looking for help. And so I went to just talk story with them, and they really just pulled me in, and it was like, thank you for wanting to help and come to this like meeting. And so it was a bunch of other students who also felt compelled to get involved in this movement, and that was the first time that I met her, and I just thought, holy moly, like, so amazing. Like the first time she called my name, I was like, oh my god, she knows my name. It was like, meeting like a rock star, but better.
It was like meeting a rock star. Like Kahuna Vai, I knew of her from the media before I actually met her. And so I was I had gone away for school. I was in LA and was not actually in Honolulu in January 1993 when the big march happens. And, she gives her famous "We Are Not Americans" speech. And I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I need to go home. And there are people like her that I really need to learn from. So came back to UH. I majored in Hawaiian studies, and fall of I think it was spring 94 that I first met her. But I remember going into the class where her class was scheduled for, and it was packed. I mean, at that time, everybody wanted to get into her class. So it was standing room only. And, there's lots of noise, people are talking. And then she walks in, the door to the front of the classroom opens in, and she walks in, and I'm like, oh, she's way shorter than I thought she was going to be. I thought she was going to be like this, because her personality was so huge. She was like 5'2". But just the presence, filled the room, and a hush just fell over the entire room. And it was like that every time she walked in. I mean, she just held that space in such a way. And I remember many of her students have this story about how we get your first exam back, and in red at the top, it's "Please see me." And I was so intimidated by her, even after having sat in her classes for several weeks and taking the exam and everything. I didn't go see her because I was like, no way. That's just way too scary. And then the next exam came, and again, "Please see me," underline. And she did that as a way to like cut through that huge crowd and have students come in and talk with her one-on-one and then encourage us. So she encouraged every single semester, every single class, she would encourage people, particularly Hawaiian women, but others too, to think about grad school. And at that moment, you're like, grad school, what is that? So that was the kind of person that she was. And then she would spend a lot of time mentoring, so Kahuna Wai was part of a group called Kui Kalahiki that was very active when I had just come to UH, and they were involved in student leadership. They were involved in like voter registration and stuff. Kahuna Wai can share a lot more, but they, Kumu Haunani-Kay actively mentored outside of the classroom and actively made sure that her students were coming along with her to all of the things that she was doing.
Did you want to elaborate a little bit, Kuhunawai, on what Noi just was talking about?
No, well, I guess a little. I think the Simi story is something that a handful of folks just thought, like, when we shared that story, I was like, oh my goodness, I wonder how many other people. And we end up finding so many other students, especially Wahine, like Noi was saying. Although I think only Kavika Tengana is the only man I knew who got that. Every other person has been Wahine. So to me, that and I think we all feel the same way, right? You get that from Haunani-Kay Trask, and everybody's like, hell no. Initially, I thought I had failed the exam, and so I thought I had to go in, and I was like, I studied. Oh my gosh. Yeah, her class was really the class that taught me to read everything and read well, because she also was great at like pointing out people. Like, I didn't think she knew who I was, so I would often like hide behind one of my classmates and friend Shane Pale. And we would all kind of sit together, and I would kind of hide. And I remember when I went to see her after the CME, I just waited to, until it was like, see me again. I was like, I better see, because I don't want to make her mad either, And when I went to see her, it was the same thing, where she's like, oh no, I know who you are. Because I was like, you know my name? She's like, yeah, you're the one hiding in the back. She's like, I know you have more to say in my class, and that's why I call on you, because I know that you've read. I'm like, oh, thanks. But she was one of the, I think, best storytellers. Like, she could really, again, hold an audience because she was so dramatic. I mean, it was like going to a show twice a week. It was like, and then she would leave you like hanging, right? So when you come back to the next class, it was like, okay, we're going to pick up the show. I mean, she was an amazing, amazing kumu, just like an amazing kumu. And again, even when it came to her students, and I shouldn't say even when, because she really prioritized students when she was there, even with all of the different things that she was doing, right? Building a building, building a program, mentoring her junior faculty, creating positions for folks to be hired in the Center for Hawaiian Studies, providing leadership for Ka Lahui Hawai'i, all these different things that she was involved in. She still made all of this time for students. So like, for example, when she had encouraged me to apply for graduate school, she like walked me through what graduate school even was, because I first generation college student, like I had no idea what I was doing. She walked me through graduate school. She said she would write letters of recommendation for me for school as well as for scholarships. I mean, she was that kind of mentor, like very, very hands-on, very hands-on.
That's amazing. In my mind, I want to be like, you guys are so lucky. That is,
we are.
Yeah,
we are.
So amazing. Yeah. So this question, do you think that there were times where she felt she was being taught by her students or by those she mentored? Or did she always feel like she was constantly teaching?
That's a good question. I don't know that. I mean, I don't know that we had a whole lot to teach her, but maybe she was. I mean, she treated us like equals in a way, like interlocutors. It wasn't like she was just being didactic all the time. Like, I'm going to tell you what to think. Like, she was like, you need to be critically analyzing. You need to be able to think and speak for yourself. She wasn't a propagandist. Like, she really wanted us to have independent thought. And so I think this is just speculation, but I think maybe in the way that we were saying when she was in Madison in grad school, that she came toe to toe with professors. Like, when she was a professor, she kind of expected us also to like, meet me here, you know, I'm not here to just tell you what to think. Like, I want you to engage with me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. She would ask us, when I was part of that student organization, we would have her come to our meetings every once in a while to help us work through issues, right? Like, how do we analyze this issue? Or this is our analysis of the issue. Like, what is your feedback on our analysis? And she would always prioritize, okay, what are you folks thinking? You know, like, we would have to go first. Like, what do you think? And then she would tell us, okay, this is kind of what I'm thinking. So yeah, like I said, I don't know if we had a lot to teach her, but I think in some of the student, maybe when the more student focused issues, when it came to like some of the student government things that came up, or even some of the ways that we were participating in broader Hawaii movements, I think she just, I don't know if she learned from it, but I feel like she admired like the work that we decided to get involved with. I mean, she would have us over for dinner all the time to just like, in her way, like mahalo us. She would always say that she was so thankful to have, you know, just like students being involved and being interested and committing time and energy to being involved in not just things on campus, but things in our broader community. That made her very, very happy. So I feel like I want to say that we provided her, I'm sure we stressed her out, but I want to say that we also provided her with some joy, you know, joy that she could share her wisdom with us, and joy that, like, we did make, I mean, I know for our little group, like, we did make her laugh all the time. It was a bunch of just like funny things that people would say and just do. And she would find just humor in being with students, you know. And again, I think from the number of times that she would have us over, I'm sure David, her partner, maybe not so much enjoyed it, although he was always a very gracious host. I think the times that she would invite us, like, she invited us over all the time just to hang out and have dinner and just talk story, talk politics, but also talk pop culture. I think that's one of the other things that Noi and I loved about her, is she knew a lot about, well, not a lot, but she knew a lot of, you know, some pop culture things that she enjoyed. Sometimes she didn't know the name of things, but she'd be like, oh yeah, I like that, you know? So she was also a fun person to just be around with. Yeah.
She loves Sudden Rush. Sudden Rush.
Yeah.
That was her favorite. Yeah. Her favorite.
Yeah.
So good. I'm glad that you touched on joy and peace. In your words, what do you think were some of Trask's proudest moments where she found joy and peace?
I think I would really say her students. When she saw us achieving, when she saw us graduating, she would always celebrate us and celebrate with us. I think some of the examples is like, she loved a place called Kaimana. I don't even know what the real name of the place. Oh, Hauchilanai. Hello. And she would take us there to celebrate just different milestones that we've all reached. You know, like, for me, graduating with my PhD, she took me there for dinner. She would take, I was part of so many celebrations that she had for other students. I remember we went to Sam Choi's fancy fine dining place when a friend of ours, Lehua Kinilau, graduated from law school. And I remember her just sitting there smiling at me and Lehua, and we're like eating our food, like, what is she? She looks so creepy, you know? But she just like with all of her earnestness, just said like, I just am so proud of you. So proud of you, for both of you, for like going to grad school and finishing and just doing all these wonderful things. And that really, on Saturday night's event, as all of us went up and did our little ho'okupu for her, like that's what I felt like. She was just probably just smiling from ear to ear with her glass of champagne, French champagne, right? There's no other kind of champagne. Like just smiling and like being so proud of all of us, you know, for our achievements, but also for just like not so much about her. Like she really, like people think, I think some of the perception is that, you know, like, oh, she's so about herself, but she really wasn't. She was one of the most generous people ever. So I think she would just be celebrating us and that she had a part in helping us achieve, you know, whatever it is that we wanted to achieve. But just seeing everybody on Saturday, like all of her former students, and everybody's so amazing. Oh my goodness. I was just, weren't you blown away? I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, totally blown away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree that she, especially that part that you were just saying, Kaunawe, about how she wasn't, like, she didn't seek the limelight for the limelight, you know, like, I think maybe now because like certain videos get circulated about her, she becomes iconic, right? And then people only see like this individual woman up on a stage speaking unapologetically. And she really was always talking about the collective and the lahui and that there's work to be done. And she really wasn't ever seeking personal glory. She would always talk about, we were sharing at this reminiscences on Saturday, like how even in classes she would talk about her siblings and how, you know, one of her siblings was an immersion school teacher. One of her siblings, or two of her siblings, were attorneys. Two of her siblings were fisher folks, Lawai'a. And she would talk about how everybody has a place, like all the members of our lahui have a place, and that each person doesn't have to do everything. You just got to do your thing well, you know, carry your kuleana, contribute to the collective, to the whole. And that's what the lahui is. It's a nation of people of diverse strengths who are concerned about uplifting others in the lahui. And so she was totally like that. And we experienced it most from the position of her students. But, you know, she was, she didn't like being, in fact, I remember we had a event where we were like honoring her after her retirement, not her retirement party, but remember that one kahuna that was in downtown, like Chinatown?
Yeah.
She just didn't want to be honored, like as an individual, you know. She wanted the focus to be back on the analysis, the work to be done, the collective. So seeing,
I would say too,
our people in movement gave her a lot of joy.
Yeah. I was just gonna add, sorry, like one of the things that I think came out of that was kind of it's a joke, but not a joke. She would always say, right, no ka lahui. So that became one of the things that we always said every time we had to do something that just also was like just hard, or just, oh, we didn't want to do it, we're tired. We'd all just be like shrugging our shoulders, no ka lahui, no ka lahui. And it became kind of a joke, and it's carried on, I think, to this next generation. Like when I was at Native Hawaiian Student Services, we would, you know, we were a large unit getting, you know, supporting Native Hawaiian students going to and through higher ed. And every time, like, my staff folks would be like, hey, let's do this thing, or let's do this thing. And they'd be like, oh, and about no ka lahui. So it became like this thing now. Every time we had to do something, no ka lahui, and that's from Haunani-Kay Trask. No ka lahui, right? Because we always got to have our eyes on the prize, which is for our lahui, right? Nation building for our people. Because she had so much, all the work, even though people see her as someone who was divisive or whatever, everything she did was from aloha, and it was a deep aloha for our people.
Yeah, how do you think that this would carry over for Kanaka in the diaspora? Do you think that she would still consider like what our kuleana would be towards each other in the diaspora, or what the lahui looks like right outside of Hawaii? What kind of sentiments do you think she would have?
I think absolutely. You know, she saw, as she says in the beginnings of many of her speeches, that genealogy is paramount for us. So it wasn't like, where are you physically located? It was, you know, your connection to your genealogy. Do you remember your ancestors? Do you help out other members of the Lahui? You know, wherever you are, like those are the most central things. She was very much critical of like an individualistic American mindset, and really always tried to focus us back on like how we're connected and how we help each other. And so I think she would be feeling the same way, you know, about anyone. It wasn't an issue that she talked about a lot, but what she did talk about a lot was the forces of displacement that exist in our islands today that force our people to become economic refugees from Hawaii. And she was fiercely critical of the kinds of touristic development, the kinds of foreign speculative investment, all the things that make it next to impossible for Kanaka to survive in Hawaii, or make it really difficult. So she would always focus on those structural forces and critiquing those structural forces. And I never, ever experienced her like criticizing Kanaka for, you know, the thing like not being Hawaiian enough. Like she would never like be like, oh, if you're not speaking our language, if you're not, you know, practicing this or that thing. What she would criticize you for and call you out for is if you were to sell out your people for personal gain. She would definitely criticize and call you out by name publicly, you know, particularly people in positions of institutional power. But she would always, like I said, you know, in reference to her siblings, like talk about how we got to have diverse strengths.
Totally agree. I think if anything, she actually, I mean, I know from having been away for graduate school, Noi too, when we hosted her, she loved meeting Hawaiians. It didn't matter where or where, like where we were or where they were from. She just loved being around Hawaiians, and she loved meeting Hawaiians, and Hawaiians loved meeting her. We had her at UCLA. I remember, and it was kind of I was like, oh, not too many people are going to show up, so we're going to have like a small, like open the coffee shop. And you would have thought like Bell Hooks was coming to talk, because there were like 300 people waiting, including the lead singer from Rage Against the Machine, who I didn't know that was him. And so we had to move we had to move it to another venue because there's so many folks, and there were so many Hawaiians that came from all over the place to see her. And she just, I mean, she was almost in tears, just, you know, like receiving lei and receiving beautiful words. And to me, that is really the essence of who she was. She just loved our Lahui so much that she really did dedicate every single, it seemed, moment of her life. The more Noi and I dig, the more we find, which is why I'm like, should we stop digging? Because it just doesn't stop. You know, for a person who, I mean, it just seemed like she was doing everything and giving every minute of her life towards our Lahui, you know, like I think that's one of the things maybe that people should understand too, is really everything she did was for our people and for our collective betterment, you know, not just for her person, not for her gain at all, because she could have been a very famous and popular and well-known scholar just in and of herself, right? She didn't have to do any of the practice things that for me makes her an exceptional leader. But she didn't, you know, she didn't. She took the criticism, she took all of the hatred that people threw at her, because she really tried to protect a lot of other folks. So yeah, so when I hear those critiques of her, like, oh, she was about herself, I'm like, there's no way she was about herself. There's no way, with all of the things that she had to deal with as an individual Hawaiian. There's no way.
Yeah, thank you for all of your sentiments. Now, I do have a question. Do you put on your students' papers, come see me in the office?
Now they submit it via Google Classroom and stuff, so I'm not using red pen anymore.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's too like traumatizing with the red. Yeah, no. No, but I feel like for me, I mentor like she did, right? Like if students show interest and they want to do more, I definitely take time. I don't know, is an excellent mentor too. Like I think we both take time, and we've definitely learned lessons from how she treated us, right? Like she never let us pay for things. She, again, was generous with her time, and both of us being like working moms, time is our most precious resource. So thinking of all the times that she spent with us really makes me appreciate her more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to ask one more question. What are your final thoughts about Dr. Trask that you want to end with that you have not had a chance to mention yet? Or maybe something you might want to reiterate that you've already said.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared for that one.
That's okay.
There's so much it's hard to it's hard to narrow in,
narrow it down
to just one thing, right? Because there's so many contributions that she made.
Okay, well, no, I was thinking, and I think I have one. And again, this is sort of aside from like all of the awesome scholarship that she's contributed. I think for folks to realize the impact she made on the trajectory for Hawaiians and higher education. So many of us are her daughters, and have gone on to do all of these things to further impact the way that other Hawaiians can participate in education. I feel like, Nori is a great example too with starting Halau Kumana. To me, that's a direct outcome of having been mentored by someone like Haunani-Kay, mentored by Haunani-Kay. For me, Native Hawaiian Student Services is something that came from mentoring from Haunani-Kay. And without those kinds of supports in our community where we're actively changing educational structures, for example, I don't think that our world would look like, for Hawaiians especially, I don't think our world would look like how it is now, where we're really making, I feel like, strides, even while under occupation, we're still doing a lot of things to help our people live in this world and to succeed in this world so that they can make change for our lahui too. So that's, I think for me, like really important for folks to know.
Mahalo.
I think the things that I would want to make sure to highlight that we learn from her is that she reminded us always that it's about land, that our struggle for sovereignty, our struggle to maintain ourselves as a people who are undergoing a long-term illegal occupation of our nation and our lands, that it absolutely is about land. So I think she would, from that 1993 speech, right around that time, right, there's the apology resolution that Congress passes and President Bill Clinton signs that says the Hawaiian people never relinquished our sovereignty or our national lands. And still to this day, there has been no return of our national lands, not an acre to the Hawaiian people for that. And so I think she would want us to remember that we not just focus on honoring her, but what was she fighting for? She was fighting for the return of our land and sovereignty. And so that fight is not over. It's a multi-generational fight that we're going to have to keep pressing for. And she would want the best way we could honor her is by carrying that struggle onward, whether or not we see a full return of all of the Hawaiian national lands that were illegally seized from our kingdom in 1898 by the U.S. Yeah, so I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is there's a speech that she gave in 1982, I believe, at the same bandstand, but it was a speech for the Proteka Ho'olawe Ohana who had gathered there, and they were remembering the deaths of George Helm and Kimo Mitchell, and they were, it was a more solemn, I think, kind of occasion, and that speech is on YouTube if people want to, look for it. But in that speech, she talks about how we are the alternative, that there was a vision for Hawaii at that time that was all about development of, luxury resorts and homes for settlers. And she reminded us that we are the alternative to that. And we are the alternative, meaning that we, in the connection to our Ike Kupuna, the restoration of our sustainable agricultural systems for producing food, for all the abundant life that our kupuna had, like we still are that, whether we're in Hawaii or we're in California or Vegas or wherever we are, like we still carry that in us. And we have to be the alternative, not only for Hawaii, right? But we also know that the entire world needs alternatives to the dominant system that is creating climate crisis, that is deepening injustices. We can be the alternative that we need, that all people need, if we live in that richness of who our kupuna were and who we continue to be because of them.
Mahalo nui for sharing Dr. Trask with us and just bringing her life to the diaspora and for those who are watching on island. Very appreciative for your time and your stories that you shared with us. And for just bringing space to why she is such a mana wahine to remember during this month, right? But we can't let you guys go without giving you accolades of following in the footsteps of your mentor. And I could say so many things about you all just from what I've read or what I've looked at. But in a sense, I would love somebody who knows you both to give you those accolades. So these are beautiful sentiments about Trask that have been shared. While we celebrate her with recognition and immense gratitude for the legacy she has left with us, I am a firm believer in providing words of affirmation and giving flowers to people while they are still here with us. I grew up in Keolu Hills, Enchanted Lakes area, where I was lucky enough, to come home to Hawaii between my father's military deployments. I went to Keolu Elementary in kindergarten and 5th grade and Kailua High School in 10th grade. One of my classmates I have stayed in touch with virtually over the years is a graduate of University of Hawaii, Manoa. She has been a vice principal of Waimanalo Elementary and Intermediate School and is now the current principal of Ka'elepulu Elementary School. So to give you some accolades today, I welcome Dr. Sherilyn Inouye as she graces us with some sentiments, and she shares about the mana that both Noi and Kahunawai are filled with. Mahalo, Cheryl, for joining us today.
Aloha.
What a beautiful surprise.
I know. So awesome.
I've been listening in the background. It's kind of cool that I was in the studio, but I was hidden behind the curtain. Like Visha said, or should I say Pawahi? Because when growing up, she was Visha to me. And it's talk about worlds colliding, that we grew up together. And she asked me to just share a few things. So I just want to mahalo you for letting me speak and extend my gratitude. And just share like the way you speak about Dr. Haunani-Kay Trask is, I share those same feelings of inspiration that you felt. And so, my relationship to Noi, you were on my dissertation committee, and I'm so grateful for the time that you spent helping me with my research. And I had the pleasure of taking my advanced qualitative methods from Kahuna. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to share a little bit about those two things, the virtual flowers, I guess, for you folks. So I'm now principal at Ka'elapulu Elementary School, but the journey to get here was really long because I actually started my PhD program in 2009, and I floundered for a while and I hopped around. I went from ed policy and even went to into the PUBA program for a year thinking, okay, like I'm not quite getting what I wanted at the College of Ed until I read The Seeds We Planted. So I believe you published that in 2013, Noi, and it was right about the time that I started as vice principal at Waimanalo Elementary School. And I hadn't really latched on to a topic that I thought was going to really be my passion. And reading that book was like the spark for me. That was a seed that you planted for me. And I was like, I got to do this, like this is my community, Waimanalo. This has to be the center of my research. And I still remember like cold emailing you, I think. And like you met me at Starbucks and like had no idea who I was. And I was like, will you be on my committee? And you said yes. And that was amazing. And I just thought, you were so, olu, I think would be the word I would use to describe how you allowed me to learn and challenged me and gave me permission as a non-Hawaiian to write about Hawaiian history and guided me through that process. And I am so grateful for that. And I also want to just say how an amazing mom you are, because I don't know if I told you that, if you knew this, Visha, but her daughter, Hina, when Hina was a senior, her senior project was she put on a series of 3 lectures, like workshops with different Hawaiian scholars. And I mean, I learned more from those lectures than any other like history course that I took, even at UH or, in my K-12 experience, definitely more than anything I got in professional development in the DOE. And just the fact that a high school senior, her mom as that incredible mentor, modeling that for her. And she was so courageous and professional in setting that up. And I learned so much from that. And I really feel like it enhanced my research. I still think about a lot of the people that she connected us with and how it just expanded my understanding of Hawaiian history from that lens, and how important that is in K-12 education, especially at a DOE public school. So so thank you for planting the seed for me. I feel like I learned so much from you, and I still use so much of that every day.
Hello, Sherilyn. I definitely will share that with Hina. She'll be so stoked to hear that too.
Yeah. And Kahuna, so I wanted to say, like, I actually dove back and I was like, gosh, I just remember feeling very challenged in your class. Like your ologies matrix, I don't know if you still do this, but I remember, like, I still kind of feel like I don't understand. But my biggest takeaway from your class is that you really forced me to think. And I just appreciate that so much, right? That as an educator, as a teacher, as a mentor, how you challenge your students to really think deeply and force us to ask the tough questions and have those difficult conversations, and that you're not afraid to like have those conversations in the class amongst the students, and how sometimes it's not comfortable and we have to be put into that uncomfortable space as settlers. And I think that really shaped me too, in being in this space now where I'm okay, you know, like I can acknowledge that. And I feel like that's the foundation on how I can be a supporter and an advocate, and bringing other settlers along with me to know what is my role in the bigger picture, and how do I support all of my students, right? Especially my students who are marginalized, right? My Native Hawaiian students and other marginalized communities. And I think when I took your class, it was critical race theory that really emerged for me from your class. And that is what I wrote my proposal not long after taking your class, and that totally changed the direction of my methodology. And so I'm so grateful. And I think the last time I actually saw Kahuna Vai was at Mauna Kea in August 2019. And I just like, it's just cool that was where I saw you, and knowing that Noi was there too. So it was very special. And yeah, I just want to say I love you both. I appreciate you. I'm so grateful. And you make such a difference. So thank you. Mahalo.
Mahalo, mahalo.
Mahalo, everyone, for being here. And just to Sherilyn as well, yes, I was Visha growing up, because most people in the States don't say Pauahi. They don't even try. So luckily in Canada, everybody can actually say Pauahi, and they actually try. So that's a good thing. I think what I would say to you is I've known you since 5th grade, in different parts of our life, right? And one thing that I have always appreciated about you is that regardless of where I was, anytime I came home, especially when we were younger, it was pivotal for me to go see my friend Sherilyn down the street from Auntie Nay's house, and for me, it was that piece of like home for me was the friends that I continue to have since kindergarten and 5th grade. You're an amazing mom, just from what I get to see, and so proud of your journey as well. So for all of you, thank you for being here. Mahalo for all of your sentiments. Thank you for bringing yourselves, and just for sharing your sentiments about Dr. Trask, and Sherilyn for your sentiments about Noi and Kahuna Vai. So mahalo, viewers, and we will see you next time on the Moana Nui podcast. Noi, Kahuna Vai, and Sherilyn, please stay tuned. Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, was a freedom then, when they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off, called themselves a republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Ka Lahui as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No work out for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if you put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course. Versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Ka Lahui as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. Never cover all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell. Even if we have to ourselves, can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell. Even if we have to ourselves, can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell. Even if we have to ourselves, can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell. Even if we have to ourselves, can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.